we have to make sure that private sector knows that it'll get a return on capital. It also is looking for return of capital at the end of the day. Increasingly, they're realizing that there are certain sectors, of the social sectors, that lend themselves for private sector investment. Education is one. One might think education doesn't lend itself. It does immensely. Infrastructure development, use of technology to accelerate action, for example. Health. You see what's going on even in developing countries. In fact, more so in developing countries. They're taking the quantum leap on using smartphone technology, biometrics, smart cards, and so on, to capture health data. And instead of spending the traditional budget for health, if we use technology as an enabler, I'm not saying that's the solution for everything, but it's an enabler. By using technology, you capture data about individuals. On the phone today with biometrics, you can know how your health is, how your pulse is going. You can report directly to a central medical center. You can get prescriptions on it remotely. You can have conversations with physicians. So in remote locations where people don't have access to all the services, they can now have virtual services, for example. Similarly, poverty alleviation. So one of the biggest players in the game is remittances. Remittances by expats. Today they use traditional methods to remit funds home. They pay a lot of money to 2 or 3 middlemen. There is new technology on the way where you can, as you know, here in Rwanda, you can put some money on your phone. You can go to neighboring Uganda. You can use that same money, that same phone, cash money there. You don't need the traditional banking services. So, excuse me. So rapidly, things are starting to change. It's the adoption rate which is the inhibitor at this point. And why is that technology going on? Because the private sector sees value. They're investing in it. It's not governments. Governments are encouraging it by saying, go ahead and please use that. The UN needs to provide that encouragement around the world. There are 91 least developed countries, landlocked countries, and small island developing states. Of those, there are only a dozen who are large countries, large populations, where scale matters. But in the smaller countries, scale cannot take place, so companies don't see it kind of valuable for them to go in and invest. That's where social capital can kick in. That's where foundations can come in. That's where social entrepreneurs can come in and saying, yes, I can solve that problem for that island, Pacific island there.
Now, let's, I touched on it before. You're a veteran in terms of partnerships and negotiations on the same. So we'll just have one scenario, and I hear your thoughts on it. We have a company called Bubble that came here and straight from London. London and Rwanda, they have a Rwandan office, so they deal with health. And health has been one of the highlighted areas. So they spent $50 million to incorporate artificial intelligence now into their online medical system. So in the event that they need a return on equity or return on investment, how would you negotiate that for them, knowing that we might need the same technology across African countries, but not enough money to pay for it?
So this is where what we call multi-stakeholder partnerships can kick in. So the World Bank, UN, World Health Organization has been pushing for that, but the World Bank and the UN invest in these kinds of initiatives. And what we do need is what works in Rwanda can also work in Kenya, can also work in Burundi, Tanzania, and take it down other parts of Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, etc. You need local partners. I'm a believer that nothing can happen through a top-down approach in this scenario. You need local partners. Because at the end of the day, you need to train them. You need to empower them. Training is empowerment. And if they're empowered, they will see the value proposition. And the World Bank, for example, as well as the UN, is looking at ways to build these partnerships. IFC, for example, makes investments in developing markets by saying, how can we find a business case so that there is real sustainability? Health, by the way, really lends itself to that. Because in the olden days, we would put up dispensaries in remote villages. We put a doctor there, for example, and then patients would come there. Records were handwritten. After 15, 20 years, the ink wore out. The pencil wore out. So there's no real records. Today, digital technology, everything can be on your smartphone. And while smartphone hasn't penetrated deeply, even feature phones provide some solutions. So what do we want? We need connectivity, we need access to information, and we need smartphones. And half the battle also is, and I'm not saying that I have the answer, is how do you pitch a project? One needs a good project writer who can say to the donor agencies, and there are bilateral agencies like USAID, like DFID, like CEDA, Canadian CEDA, Swedish CEDA, NORAID, etc., who are looking to help the developing world. Sometimes they come from their own solutions. They forget that we should talk to the stakeholders. Stakeholders know what the missing links are, and then figure out how, well, going into the Ministry for Telecom and saying, can you help us? We want to put this in place. We want to help. Then they have to work with the Ministry of Health.